Seattle exhales rain like steam, and the Space Needle pricks the cloud bank as if testing a pulse. On Horizon Biotech's 40th floor, marble gleams, servers hum, and money smells like espresso. Aisha Carter, 45, glides a mop along the boardroom threshold, eyes catching what cameras miss. Victor Langston, 55, prince of patents and quarterly miracles, laughs mid-call, and the laugh fractures. His consonants smear. His glass finds the table on the second try. A fingertip trembles, then hides in a pocket. The room doesn't see. It never does. Aisha clocks everything. The left lid droop, the hitch in gate, the 2 beats of silence where a name should be. Not anxiety, not fatigue. A drill she knows by nerve memory starts whispering. Neurological, vascular, urgent. She steps forward. Security blinks. Executives exchange smirks, sighs to their bonuses. Victor notices the janitor and chooses pride. Floors, please. 2 words, slurred enough to salt her doubt and confirm her fear. Aisha swallows heat, counts seconds, watches his right shoe turn inward, and listens to the wet percussion of rain against glass. Her past, the ER nights, the whistle she blew, the license they took, presses like a stethoscope to her ribs. She could walk away and no one would remember her face. She could speak, and everyone would remember her audacity. She tries the door handle anyway. It resists. A meeting invite flashes on a wall. Product launch, in 30 minutes. Victor straightens, pretending control, color draining under immaculate lighting. Aisha's mind sketches routes. Wife, elevator, front desk, 911. The retired neurologist 2 towers over, whose contact she saved for reasons she never named. She has 1 shot to make the building listen before a vessel fails. Time, cruel and narrowing, keeps marching. Her next move will change everything. What she does next will shock you. Atlanta made Aisha Carter precise. 2 decades in Grady's emergency department trained her to hear a monitor's rhythm like tempo, to read fear off a stranger's shoulders, and to make calm feel contagious. She slid tubes past swelling cords, found veins in bouncing rigs, and coaxed breath back into doubtful lungs. Colleagues trusted her judgment when seconds cost tissue. She also saw a quieter pattern in triage notes and discharge times. Pain scores from Black patients were doubted more. Insurance status pushed some cases to the edge of impossible. She began logging dates, symptoms, weights, and outcomes. After a night that ended with a teenager stabilized against luck, she sent a whistleblower report to leadership. It was meticulous, respectful, and undeniable. She expected training and reform. Instead came friendly meetings about tone, reminders that context matters, and questions about whether she felt overwhelmed. Then a charting error appeared under her username for a patient she never touched. A vial carried the wrong label. A consent form vanished. Each issue looked small alone and heavy together. Administrators spoke about protecting public trust. Counselors suggested time off. Her license was suspended pending review. She brought proof, but the ground kept shifting. Friends stopped answering texts. A committee decided she had violated protocol in ways they could not ignore. She walked out into an Atlanta afternoon loud with cicadas. Badge clipped from her collar, heat sinking into her bones. Seattle offered distance and water. She rented a studio above the working lip of Puget Sound. A narrow room, with 3 plants, a hot plate and a window that turned fairy lights into moving stars. Rain-streaked windows reflecting the city's neon glow washed color across her ceiling, most nights, and she found comfort in that watery light. She woke before dawn, brewed coffee, folded her bedding, and studied. Her shelves held second-hand journals passed along by a retired neurologist. She met while volunteering at a clinic. She labeled binders neuro, cardio, endocrine, ethics, underlining in pencil as new research sharpened old instincts. She could not practice, yet she refused to let her attention dull. On the bus to South Lake Union, she scrolled reports about transient ischemic attacks, sentinel headaches, and aneurysms that whisper before they roar. Horizon Biotech paid her to clean the floors that power walkers had walked on. The elevator opened to a lobby perfumed with citrus and status. Glass looked over cranes, water, and the needled spine of the skyline. She wore gray scrubs, sturdy shoes, and a custodial badge. Executives moved as if trailed by weather system. She wiped conference tables between investor calls, emptied bins full of draft press releases, and lined up chairs that cost more than her rent. She did not talk about Atlanta. When co-workers asked why she had come west, she said lightly, "For the rain," then returned to work before the truth could surface. In October, she noticed Victor Langston the way a medic hears a siren early. He stood in a corridor with a phone to his ear, voice smooth. When he reached for the elevator, his left hand trembled for a breath and steadied. She stored the moment. The next week, while she sprayed glass, he faltered on a vendor's name and masked it with a joke. Another day, she found his keycard in a restroom beside a sink, as if he had dropped it. These were drips that made the bucket heavy. She watched more closely. He rubbed his temple after meetings. Syllables slipped at the edges. His right foot took the larger step, while the left hesitated. When he pivoted, she told herself to stop recording, then bought a pocket note. She wrote only initials, times and neutral descriptions. Denial thrives without timestamps. The building moved with glossy urgency. Marcus Reed, CFO, treated time as a metronome. Elena Torres, COO, sliced days into measurable progress. Assistants built calendars like fortresses. Speed made a wind that pushed warnings aside. Aisha cleaned the boardroom after presentations about a new drug. Words like pipeline and adoption curved across screens. She emptied a trash can and found a draft speech full of promises. That night, she ate rice beside the window and read an article linking subtle tremors and word-finding pauses to aneurysms that leak before they burst. She remembered a patient who called a pain a thunderclap. By the scan, blood already pooled where it never should. Memory made her stomach go tight. She set the journal aside and looked at the sound, where ferries drew chalk lines across dark water. Days shortened. Office lights burned longer. She watched Victor's confidence wobble under polish. He mislaid a document, then said he was testing them. He forgot a name, then joked about age. He gripped a railing with his right hand and kept the left buried in his pocket, as if hiding a secret. She understood both courage and fear. Speaking could cost her job and the fragile stability she had rebuilt. Silence could cost a stranger his life and leave her with a grief that would not let her sleep. She tried a line while vacuuming. "You may be at risk. Please see a doctor today." She imagined dismissal or contempt and felt the phantom weight of meetings where she would be called disruptive. On Sunday, she rode the bus to Discovery Park and walked the bluff. Wind combed the grass flat. Container ships crept toward the horizon. She practiced the sentence again, willing to bend pride if it added a sliver of safety. Monday added another point. In a quiet stretch between meetings, he paused mid-thought, eyes searching the air for a number that refused to come. The lapse ended fast and left a shadow. That evening, she updated the notebook. Left hand tremor 6 to 8 seconds. Word pause 4 seconds. Mild lid droop with fatigue. Irritated tone rising. She underlined the last line twice, then shut the cover. She thought of the oath that never leaves a medic. First, not harm. Even stripped of a license, the oath lived in her. Not speaking felt like harm now. Back at Horizon, water clung to glass. The city waited, grey and listening, patient. The city beyond looked smudged and silver. She polished the boardroom table until reflections of pendant lights ran along the surface like a river. She aligned placards and steadied her breath. Victor swept in with assistance, jacket perfect. A folder slipped, and papers fanned across the floor. He stooped, rose too quickly, reached for the chair, then waved off help, all in 3 seconds. Aisha tracked each beat, feeling time narrow. She did not think about committees or badges. She thought about vessels and pressure, and the way denial grows in successful rooms. She thought about her small studio, where fairy horns guide her to sleep, and about a man who might be days from catastrophe. She decided with the quiet clarity she trusted on longest nights, that if the signs continued through the afternoon, she would speak. She would choose a moment that protected his dignity and demanded speed. She would accept whatever followed. Seattle breathed rain against the windows. Neon smeared across puddles. A ferry sounded its low note. Aisha folded her cloth, slipped the notebook into her pocket, and moved to the doorway, watching, listening, ready to follow the evidence wherever it led. Rain hammered the 40-story glass like a drumline, while Horizon Biotech's board assembled around a table that looked long enough to land a plane. Aisha Carter worked the perimeter with quiet precision, aligning placards, refilling water, hiding cables and letting the uniform shield her. She had decided to observe, not to intervene, unless the signs shifted from worry to danger. Victor Langston entered with a practiced stride, jacket sharp, grin unthreatened, assistants orbiting like satellites, taking reading. He settled at the head and skimmed papers that glowed under pendant lights. Marcus Reed, CFO, clicked his pen and launched into uptake curves and cost bands. Elena Torres, COO, watched the clock like a hawk. Ayesha watched Victor. He answered a simple forecast question and delayed a syllable, catching it mid-air like a dropped key. He misnamed a trial city and turned Phoenix into a joke before an assistant whispered Port. He reached for a glass and nudged it off-center, before correcting with a quick jerk that drew a faint ring across wood. A knot pulled in Ayesha's neck. She drew out her small notebook, the one she kept buried, unless refusal threatened a life, and wrote 3 phrases: naming error, spatial misreach, slur on side. She kept moving. The screen filled with revenue arcs that climbed like scaffolding. Victor tried to pivot into regulatory wins and stumbled on a phrase twice, finishing it on the 3rd pass, as if threading a needle in the wind. Laughter arrived a breath late. Rain deepened, making the city's lights bleed into the lacquered table. Ayesha felt the old hum of triage, assessment, timing, airway, breathing, circulation, push back against the role expected of her. She set a fresh picture on the credenza and waited for a seam in conversation. When Victor rubbed his left temple and then dropped his hand, she moved. "Sir," she said, voice even, "please take 5 minutes today to see a clinician. I'm concerned." The murmur thinned. Victor turned with a smile shaped to extinguish inconveniences. "We're in the middle of something," he said, genial at first. Ayesha kept her eyes at throat level, de-escalation by habit. "Your speech is slightly off, and you've reached and missed twice. It could be nothing. It could be urgent." Marcus exhaled, not quite a laugh. "We have a launch," he said. Elena's expression sharpened into policy. Victor's tone cooled, a pain lowering into place. "Stick to scrubbing floors, Ayesha." The words hit with the clean force of a door closing. Heads dipped into laptops. A flush rose under Ayesha's cheeks, then faded, leaving a steadier heat. She stepped back as if adjusting the picture and wrote, "Reprimand, irritability, episode continues." She slid the notebook flat against her thumb. Victor pushed forward, interrogating projections he had approved, rearranging names when memory slipped, keeping his left hand buried in a pocket as though it could hide a tremor. Outside, ferry horns floated through the rain. Risk management took the screen. Victor paced, a show of control, clipping an easel leg with his knee before steadying himself without comment. Marcus detailed cache buffers and exposure. Elena argued for aggressive deployment, the language of velocity. Ayesha watched a subtle lid droop, reclaim the eye, then retreat. He fumbled a statistic, converted the miss into a quip, and kept going. She logged. Mild psoas paraphasia, impulsivity. Her stomach tightened. Memories of Atlanta's quiet retaliation rose and passed. Her oath did not. Visibility never decides responsibility. She wiped a ring of water, then tried again during the break, catching the head assistant near the door. "Please ask Mr. Langston to accept a quick evaluation. I'm worried about an acute neurological event," she said. The assistant's smile was frictionless. "We have concierge physician. He's fine." The door sighed shut. Ayesha wrote, "Gatekeeping. No escalation." The rain pressed harder, as if the weather refused to be indifferent. Attendees returned with damp coats and louder voices. Victor resumed, describing investor calls, then used a word that belonged elsewhere and moved past it without hearing himself until Marcus corrected. Irritation flashed. The smile reshaped. Ayesha felt time narrow. She penciled, "Watch for thunderclap headache. Call emergency on collapse. Continue documentation." She opened her phone to the employee directory, found Clara Langston's listing, and closed it again. One wrong move would hand Marcus a reason to end her job by noon tomorrow. The last segment began. A crescendo meant to broadcast inevitability. A rendering of a blister pack filled the wall. A tagline promised outcomes like weather. Inside, Ayesha understood the storm she feared lived behind Victor's eyes. She stepped forward at a measured pace. Miss Langston, please take 5 minutes for a basic neurological check. It could stop something catastrophic. His breath snagged, then flattened into a scoff. Security, he murmured. Not a command. A reminder. No one moved. The guard weighed silence against spectacle, and chose stillness. Marcus wrapped himself in procedure. You've overstepped. This is restricted. Elena said, leave now without malice. Only certainty. Ayesha let the push roll past. She could not cut through power with volume. She could outlast it with record and patience. She watched Victor perform precision that his body could no longer guarantee, closing with a cadence that sounded memorized. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. He remained still a heartbeat longer than anyone else. She felt the cost in that extra. She lifted pitchers and rolled the cart into the hallway, where the air smelled like disinfectant and wet wool. Her hands steadied on metal. She set the notebook on the cart's lip and logged the afternoon with clinical clarity, inserting even the contempt, because anger can be a shield for a frightened brain. She added a line that was not medical. We'll try again. When she re-entered, the boardroom had shifted into post-game ming. Victor stood with a hand braced on a chair back, jaw tight, smile holding. Ayesha found a seam where her voice could pass without echo. I'm not here to embarrass you, she said quietly. I'm telling you the truth, because caution is mercy. His gaze slid through her toward the windows, where the city smeared neon across rain. That refusal stung less than the small involuntary twitch near his jaw. She picked up stray cups and let the room empty. Alone, she wiped prints from the glass while thunder rumbled like a polite warning. She slipped the notebook into her pocket and looked down at umbrellas blooming on sidewalks. She imagined an ambulance weaving through intersections, doors opening, strangers making way, a permission her warnings did not receive. She promised herself silence would not be the last entry. She would document until doubt had no air, then choose a step that balanced dignity and speed. She turned off the display, checked the lock, and pushed the cart toward elevators that blinked like steady beacons. She carried that certainty back upstairs, into corridors humming with scheduled confidence, and moved with the quiet dignity that had survived every room that tried to erase it. Outside, the storm deepened, windows humming, while the city waited, breath held, for someone to choose courage over etiquette today. Have you ever been ignored for speaking the truth? Stay with Ayesha's story to see how she fights back. Horizon Biotech ran like a luxury train through bad weather, polished brass flashing while everything outside blurred. Analysts fed projections into decks that sparkled. Compliance crafted phrases that softened risks until they sounded like features. Victor Langston shepherded a controversial pill toward launch, with a salesman's radiance that filled every corridor. In meetings, he framed complaints about nausea and vertigo as perceptual noise rather than pharmacology, then waved at a slide whose curve rose cleanly above estimates. Ayesha Carter moved along glass walls with her cart, eyes taking the company's pulse the way she once watched monitors, noting where pressure built and where silence covered fractures. In a lab hallway, she heard engineers whisper about a cluster of adverse events that data triage would dilute. Outside the executive suite, she passed Elena Torres, conferring with legal about market optics, not patient burden, and caught a phrase that sat in her stomach all night: acceptable trade-offs. Seattle's biotech district glittered through mist, towers standing like instruments above a waterfront smeared with fog, ferries sketching white seams across gray water, while cranes ticked through a slow ballet. Ayesha finished a conference cleanup and found a draft memo about messaging. It described a strategy to recast dizziness as an adjustment period and frame fatigue as proof of efficacy, language that treated discomfort like a price tag attached to salvation. Victor's charm could redirect any conversation, yet his body kept betraying signals that refused choreography. Under the downlight, his pupils sometimes widened unevenly, though the room did not darken. When he pivoted to the screen, his balance lagged, right foot compensating for a left that wanted to drift. After lunch, he reached for a laser pointer and missed by half an inch, hand correcting with a jerk that left a scrawl of red before he steadied. Ayesha wrote in her pocket notebook with neutral precision: anisocoria, coordination deficits, probable vascular involvement, frequency increasing. On the mezzanine, she passed Marcus Reed and asked for a minute. I'm concerned about Mr. Langston, she said. Neurological signs are recurring. He should be evaluated today. Marcus adjusted his cuff and never met her eyes. "You are not qualified to speculate," he replied. "Offer this again, and facilities will replace you." Aisha accepted the warning and made space beneath the words for duty. She returned to workstations where assistants rehearsed talking points, where a photographer staged props for an internal profile, and where a planner stacked branded notebooks beside cookies like badges for loyalty. This building loved shorthand, loved a story that kept shareholders calm. At the loading dock, she reread a paper on sentinel hemorrhage, headaches that arrived like a match in a dark room, transient deficits that foreshadowed rupture, the math of minutes and outcomes. Vigilance was mercy. That afternoon, Elena hosted a review with clinical officers on one side and marketing on the other, an orchestra split by motive. Someone raised blurred vision in a subset, and Elena nodded while describing mitigation through packaging instructions and expectation set. "Patients trust outcomes," she said. "Let's ensure providers frame temporary discomfort as a bridge to relief." Pupils again, Aisha thought, catching a flicker in Victor's gaze as he scanned a page that did not hold. He favored the right when he turned. Later he gripped a stair rail with too much force, knuckles whitening before pride loosened them. She marked it down. Laterality, grip spikes, micro stumbles, irritability at correction, clouds pressed low, rain dotting the surface of the sound with patient fingers. In her studio, she traced anatomy diagrams, arteries curving like branches under frost. Every sign suggested a bulge demanding attention, a vessel wall whispering before it tore. She copied phrases into a slim folder and tucked it with her notebook, then fell asleep to fairy horns counting time. Morning brought a company-wide rehearsal. A drone camera buzzed above the lobby, while employees arranged into a living infographic. Victor arrived late, energy granular, bursts followed by pauses that lasted a heartbeat too long. During a quick interview, he lost a product code, then improvised an acronym that belonged to another program. Applause washed over the mistake. Aisha stood at the edge of the frame with a rag and watched his pupils flare again. The world outside was overcast, neither bright nor dim. She wrote, "Unequal dilation persists, independent of stimulus." She tried Marcus once more near the service elevator, voice low. "Please, at least call Clara. If he refuses a check, she might convince him." Marcus pivoted, jaw tight. "Another boundary violation, and your badge stops working," he said. "I'm finished discussing this." Elena emerged from a call and added without looking up, "Focus on facilities. We have safety committees for a reason." Aisha let the slight fuel kick. She could not pry open a locked system with credentials she no longer held. She could watch, record, prepare, and intervene if collapse arrived. Compliance loved to claim oversight, yet budgets steered verdicts. Safety minutes, read like choreography for avoiding blame, not care. Dockside fog wrapped the campus, while billboards promised hope in fonts taller than people. Inside those promises, meetings weighed market share against warnings, each calculation moving the pill closer to shelves. Aisha felt the arithmetic grow cruel. Seattle kept breathing mist, gulls knifing through wind, container ships lugging color under a ceiling of cloud. Within that rhythm, Horizon's tower shone like a promise, and behaved like a vault, letting light through while secrets stayed thick inside. Aisha rolled her cart across marble that reflected pendant halos, and returned to the boardroom where optimism dried on every slide. Victor entered with Clara on speaker, their exchange clipped, cheerful, staged for nearby ears. He ended the call and misjudged the distance to his chair again. Aisha steadied a glass before it tipped, then retreated. Elena recited milestones while Marcus mapped revenue to quarters like stepping stones. Victor nodded and failed to track a timeline he had rehearsed yesterday. She caught the shiver in his left fingers, and the way his smile hardened when an analyst corrected a figure. In the margin she added, "Emotional lability, fatigue low, left side drift, recommend immediate imaging." She pictured him under scanners, dye lighting branches, a neurosurgeon tracing risk with a gloved finger. Her role, stripped of title, had not changed. "Guard life where you stand." She lifted the picture, poured water for anyone within reach, and waited for a moment when decency could slip past power without theatrics. A tremor haloed Victor's next sentence, then cleared. Aisha inhaled and held that breath as if steady lungs could loan balance across a room. She thought about Atlanta, about truth wrapped in soft words and still punished, about the oath that did not require permission to operate, resolve set like a hard light. She would keep writing, keep seeing, Keep primed for the instant when silence could no longer be cut. In a place where gloss made harsh edges look clean, she would stay gritty enough to catch what polish hit. The waterfront fogged again, city lights feathering across water, and inside that muted grandeur, a woman in grey held fast to what mattered, ready to move the second the universe stopped giving second chances. Rain stitched Seattle into a hush as Aisha left Horizons Plaza for a cafe glowing like a small hearth. Condensation blurred the window. Bicycles hissed over wet pavement. A barista hummed a soul chorus. She ordered an Americano and took a corner seat. Notebook steady in her pocket, a woman with silver coils, under a navy cap, shook rain from her coat and queued beside her with the worn grace of someone who had spent years shrinking crises. Their eyes met, and Aisha recognized a clinician's composure. "That seat taken?" the stranger asked. Voice low, kind. Aisha gestured. They sat. "Naomi Foster," the woman said, offering a dry hand. "Neurology. Retired, mostly. Consulting across the street." Aisha answered plainly. "ER nurse by training, custodial by title." Naomi's gaze flicked to the notebook. "You still carry a field log?" Aisha nodded and described why the pages were filling again. She outlined what she saw in the glass halls. The CEO's left hand tremoring during emphasis, misjudged reaches corrected with abrupt jerks, speech slipping under pressure, a mild leftward drift on pivots, pupils widening unevenly, despite steady light, irritation flaring. When an analyst fixed a figure, she kept adjectives out and times in. Naomi listened to the way clinicians map patterns. "Onset? Weeks," Aisha said. "More frequent lately. Thunderclap pain. Nausea. Not allowed. Temple rubbing after meetings." Naomi weighed the list. "2 main branches," she said. "Aneurysm, with sentinel bleeds, or a mass taking space. Alone, each sign is slippery. Together, they demand imaging now." Relief and fear braided through Aisha's chest. Validation steadied her. Escalation sharpened duty. "I tried to warn him," she said. "He told me to stick to floors. The CFO threatened my job. The COO buried it in policy." Naomi kept anger and care together. "Power prefers mirrors," she said. "Give it what it can't dodge. Chronology, dates, times, duration, context, witnesses, conditions. If you note the mood, pair it with language and length. Your notebook should read like a camera." Steam lifted from their cups. Outside, ferries drew white seams across pewter water. Aisha gave the short Atlanta story. Evidence turned cudgel, a login she never used, authoring errors, and a committee removing her license. Naomi didn't ask for proof. "They took paperwork," she said. "Not your skill. Trust what you see." They built a plan on a napkin. Naomi drew columns, labeled gait, grip, gaze, speech under load, pupils, headache, character, triggers, resolution and witnesses. "Write like an instrument," she said. "Boring beats spin." Aisha laughed despite the weight on her shoulders. "Boring wins," she echoed, and copied the columns into clean pages. When they stood to leave, Naomi pressed a card into Aisha's palm. "If an emergency arises, call. I will answer." They stepped into rain falling soft and steady, a scrim over cranes and masts. Gulls sketched white cursive above crosswalks. Buses breathed along the curb. They split at the corner. Naomi toward a cedar-trimmed cube. Aisha toward revolving doors that spun like ritual. Back inside Horizon, citrus and ambition perfumed the corridor. Banners promised renewal while meetings optimized discomfort. Victor emerged from a filmed interview worn with practiced charm, then missed his chair by a palm's width, and masked it with an oversized joke. Aisha noted time, surface, distance, witness list, and correction speed. On the stairwell landing, he squeezed the rail until knuckles blanched, then let go as if ashamed of need. She logged grip spikes and humidity. At the service elevator, she tried Marcus again, tone even. "Please encourage evaluation to..." He adjusted a cuff, met the far wall and said, "Another boundary violation and your badge is gone." Elena passed, voice polished. "Safety committees exist for this." Aisha tucked the warning beside determination and kept moving. That night, the cafe felt like a familiar hand on a shoulder. Naomi had printed recent reviews and spread them like maps. Sentinel bleeds masquerade as migraines, she said. Micro-deficits bloom under stress. Families notice mood first. Clues prefer crowds. Your job is to separate them. Aisha described Victor's corrections growing sharper when challenged. The forced humor, the fatigue carving shadows. Naomi's jaw tightened. He is on a clock, she said softly. So are you. Prepare for action without permission. They rehearsed steps for collapse, call, position, airway, breathing, circulation and information for paramedics. A barista slid 2 scones across, as if complicit in their quiet mission. Later, in her studio above the working edge of the sound, Aisha drafted a letter without flourish. Dear Miss Langston, I am writing anonymously because my position limits options, but conscience does not. Your husband displays intermittent coordination issues, unequal pupils in steady light, brief word-finding lapses under cognitive load, and a mild left-sided drift. These signs can indicate vascular risk or a tumor. Please encourage immediate evaluation. I maintain detailed documentation and can provide times and contexts on request. She sealed it for Clara and walked it to a blue box, while a saxophone bent notes under an awning. Streetlights threw long spears across puddles. The envelope dropped with a sound small and decisive. Morning brought fog thick enough to erase the far shore. Inside the tower, a drone buzzed over polished stone, filming a morale reel. Victor strode through the frame. Charisma bright, edges fray. He lost a product code and replaced it with an acronym from another program. The error was corrected. Afterward, he turned sharply toward a monitor, balance lagging half a beat. Aisha steadied a glass before it skittered, wrote beneath the counter lip, and moved on. That evening she hid a duplicate set of notes under cookbooks. Resolve settled like a stone, where panic once rattled. By Thursday patterns tightened, an off note in stride at 9, lid droop by noon, anasacoria at 2, irritability at 4. She added environment, bright overcast, steady HVAC, tile or carpet, caffeine intake, observed. Spin hates detail. She texted Naomi one word, documented, and received pride within a minute. That reply lifted her like a hand from a river. She was no longer yelling into the wind. She was building a bridge, plank by plank. Friday delivered a call routed through facilities, where emergencies seldom arrive. This is Clara Langston, the voice said, measured, strong. You wrote. Aisha considered retreat, and chose truth. Yes, I am a trained clinician, no longer licensed. I want him evaluated today. Quiet gathered on the line. I was a nurse, Clara answered. Send me the times. If he won't listen to you or me, he'll listen to imaging. Relief loosened something clenched for weeks. Aisha sent a summary within minutes. Dates, durations, contexts. Who corrected which misstatement, light conditions, and recovery intervals. Clara replied with 2 words. On it. Seattle's waterfront exhaled mist, as gulls stitched white arcs above ferries, dragging chalk across grey water. The tower across the street gleamed a promise. Inside, ethical language polished calculations. Outside, rain told the truth, with patience. Aisha pushed her cart through revolving doors, carrying an oath that outlived paperwork and a partnership that made courage communal. She could not force a decision, but she could witness without flinching, prepare without spectacle, and act the second time, becoming a blade. Ever found strength in an unexpected ally? Keep following Aisha's fight for justice. Rain pressed long fingers against Horizon's glass, while the board gathered for a quarterly war dance beneath pendant lights, glimmering like small moons. The skyline hovered beyond, a forest of cranes and towers cutting into mist, headlights threading the waterfront, while ferries carved white seams across still water. Aisha Carter rolled her cart to the threshold and stopped 2 paces inside, invisible until trouble demanded a witness. Victor Langston entered with a smile trained to bend rooms, jacket immaculate, cufflinks throwing cold sparks under LED glow. Marcus Reed clicked a pen like a metronome. Elena Torres arranged tablets into a row straight as a runway, and analysts stacked charts, promising velocity. Aisha felt the weather in Victor before he spoke, a tightness at the jaw, breath too shallow for someone selling inevitability. He scanned the agenda, nodded to a director he called Daniel, And the man's name was David, an assistant corrected under her breath. Victor nodded again, sailed on, and said Phoenix, when he meant Portland, then rewrote the stumble with a joke that found laughter a beat late. He reached for a glass and missed by half an inch, fingers recalibrating with a jerk that trembled longer than pride could hide. Aisha wrote without looking down, letting the motion hide notation, misnaming, spatial miss, tremor sustained. Rain chased itself across 40 stories of glass. Through the boardroom's length, the city looked like a stage set washed in silver, and 10 people rehearsed a prophet script while one man's body held a louder line. Victor paced toward the wall screen, pivoted, stumbled, caught himself on chrome, and grinned like control had never left. Marcus resumed, moving money between decks. Elena studied risk like a hunter reading wind. Aisha kept her back to the glass, and her gaze on Victor's pupils, as downlights brought no change. Yet one widened anyway, a dark coin swallowing, ringed light. She logged Anasakoria, duration 7 seconds. Victor continued, tone smooth, thought slipping, eyes hardening when numbers exposed a hole he had patched yesterday. When questions shifted to safety, he leaned on volume. A director mentioned dizziness cluster. Elena soothed with language about expectation management, temporary adaptation, and patient education. Victor translated that into a vow, spoke over the concern, then forgot the clinical lead's name entirely. Silence fell in a neat square. Clara Langston's voice sliced that square open from a speaker by Victor's elbow. She had dialed in halfway through and waited for the signal. "Victor, we need to discuss the letter," she said, calm with iron underneath. He stiffened, smile thinning. "A letter," he echoed, "anonymously written, detailed, and specific." Clara answered. It catalogued tremors, word loss, unequal pupils, leftward drift, misreaches, and irritability under load. Clara's words stacked like clean plates. It sounded like Aisha's notebook had found a second home. Victor laughed, but the sound started late and ended early. "Anonymous alarmists love dramatics," he said. "I am healthy, overworked, and surrounded by warriors who need something real to do." Marcus leaned forward. "We have a launch in motion," he added, voice neutral as a contract. Elena watched Victor's left hand, then looked away. Aisha stepped forward 1 inch, then froze as security drifted near the door. Clara did not soften. "I know a sentinel when I hear one," she said. "I trained on stroke protocols, and your last 2 calls carried a slur. Get scanned today." Victor's face flushed, pride outrunning caution. "Who sent you that letter?" he demanded. His gaze lifted, swept the glass, and found Aisha, as if irritation were a compass. "You," he snapped, voice cutting down the table. "You clean and gossip, and stick your nose where it doesn't belong." Lightning flared somewhere beyond the sound, though the thunder never arrived. The room supplied its own. His left hand trembled outright now, a rapid flutter he pinned in a pocket. Aisha met Clara's voice with her steady tone. "Miss Langston," she said, projecting enough for the mic to catch without rising to spectacle. "The pattern fits an aneurysm, risk, or a mass. He needs imaging immediately." Marcus stood, palm out. "That's enough. Leave the room," he said. Elena added policy about roles, badges and procedure. Aisha breathed once, refused to look away, and pulled the small notebook from her pocket, as if presenting a warrant. She turned to Clara's speaker. "I have logs from 5 weeks, down to minutes and conditions," she said. "I will hand them to you, and the paramedics, if needed." Victor pointed at the door. "Out," he said, the word landing heavy and late. He took a step to emphasize the order. His toe caught the chair leg, his left knee buckled, and only the table's edge kept him upright. Laughter died without permission. Outside the windows, headlights smeared across rain, a river of red and white moving with blunt certainty toward somewhere safer than this room. Clara's voice softened into something dangerous. "Victor," she said, "sit down. We are past pride." Victor inhaled hard, steadied, and he forced a grin the way performers salvage a line. "The show must go on," he said. Even he heard the slur buried in the quip. Aisha eased nearer, close enough to catch a faint tremor along his jaw, close enough that security's radio hit. Marcus whispered for someone to cut the line, but Clara's presence held. A director cleared his throat and asked about supply chains, pretending the room was a normal ocean, not a storm. Aisha waited for that pretense to pass, then aimed a sentence at the only person who might move this stalemate. Clara, I trained in emergency care, she said. My license is gone because power dislikes truth, not because judgment failed. I am prepared to call an ambulance. Victor banged a palm on wood. Try it, he said, and you're finished here. Aisha didn't flinch. Firing me won't seal a vessel, she replied. Elena looked toward the rain as if searching for an exit in the sky. Marcus measured liability like a chess clock. The room had shifted subtler than any outline could capture. Authority felt brittle, responsibility heavy, time thinner than glass. Clara broke the pause with a decision. Read me your last 10 entries, she said. Aisha opened to today, yesterday, last week, voice low and level, as she listed temporal gaps, missteps, durations, light levels, corrections by others, and recovery speed. She kept the adjectives from the lines, leaving only facts and seconds. Clara breathed out. That's a clinical ledger, she said. Marcus, postpone the close. Elena, call downstairs and reserve imaging across the street. Victor, we're ending this theater. Victor tried to stand again and nearly tipped. He masked the sway with showmanship that didn't quite land. Aisha closed the notebook, stepped back, and felt the guard's eyes soften. Rain thickened, beating a count against the glass. Sirens moved somewhere deep in the city like red threads pulled through cloth. Victor reached for water, lifted with his right hand, and the left flutter returned, smaller but relentless. Clara spoke quietly into the microphone. If he refuses to leave, call emergency services from my phone, she said. Elena exhaled and nodded to an assistant to clear the corridor. Marcus found a delay script. Lightning veined the clouds, while Horizon's auditorium pulsed with stage lights and cameras. A theater designed to turn forecasts into ovations. Victor Langston stepped into the spot, grin buffed thin, voice set to triumph, jacket without a crease. He thanked partners, lifted a laser, and said the wrong product code before laughing it off. Aisha Carter stood near the side door with a bin liner, looped at her wrist, close enough to watch his pupils dilate without any change in house lights, close enough to hear a vowel drag. Victor pressed forward, but names slid, a number mislaid itself, and the red dot wrote a nervous loop across the screen. Marcus Reed watched the ceiling. Elena Torres murmured to an assistant. Security shifted by the rail. Aisha measured time against her pulse and fixed the onset in memory. 1942. Victor pivoted, clipped the stage lip, recovered with a theatrical bow, waved away hands, and started the next section. Clara Langston, already in the third row, placed her bag on the floor and leaned forward, nurse instincts waking like a reflex. Launch will change everything, Victor said, and the words arrived skewed, consonants clipped, vowels swollen. The pointer clattered, his free hand twitched, then his whole body drew tight, as if a wire jerked spine to skull. He fell into the podium and seized. Aisha crossed the stage, knelt at his shoulder, and spoke so the front rows could hear. Time 0, she said. You with the headset, call 911 and report seizure, adult male, possible hemorrhagic event. You, cut the mic. You bring the first aid kit and an AED. Don't place pads unless he loses pulse. The nearest guard ran. Aisha slid a folded blazer under his head, cleared space, loosened the tie, and kept her fingers from his jaw. Do not restrain him, she said. Protect the skull. Track duration. Elena counted seconds, voice even by force of will. Clara reached the stage and crouched opposite, eyes fixed, breath tight. I'm here, she said, mostly to steady herself. Victor's limbs jolted, then softened into tremor. Postictal. Aisha. She rolled him to his side, checked the airway, felt the carotid, watched the chest rise, and kept the head angled to keep blood from pooling in the mouth. The audience fell into a dense hush, broken only by rain drumming on glass, and a far siren stitching through downtown. Clara saw a corner of paper in Aisha's pocket. Aisha handed over the notebook without looking away. 5 weeks, she said. Times, contexts, light, duration, corrections, mood shifts. Thank you, Clara answered. The seizure ended. Victor groaned and tried to rise. Aisha pressed a palm to his shoulder. Stay down, she said. Breathe slowly. Help is coming. His pupils remained uneven, the left wider. She noted it aloud for the record. Medics rushed in with a bag and a monitor, rain flashing on jackets. They clipped a pulse ox, wrapped a cuff, slid a cannula, and asked for a report. Collapse at 1945 after progressive language errors and coordination lapses over week. Anisocoria left dominant, partial facial droop, seizure about 90 seconds, postictal confusion, airway guarded, respirations adequate, pulse rapid, regular. History likely includes sentinel headache and irritability, documentation with spouse. The lead medic nodded, confirmed pupils with a penlight, and ordered the stretcher. Elena cleared a path. Marcus finally lowered his pen. Routing to Harborview, the medic said. Aisha squeezed Clara's shoulder. Ride with him, she said. I'll call Naomi. Clara gripped her hand, climbed into the rig, and the doors slammed. Sirens painted the avenue in red. Aisha ducked into a service hall, dialed Naomi Foster, and felt her hand steady the moment the voice answered. He's en route. Aisha. Seizure on stage. Anisocoria. Slur. Left-sided signs. Weeks of deficits. Harborview. I'm nearby, Naomi replied. Meet me at the ER door. Aisha rode with a sympathetic driver, who had watched the crowd pour outside and reached the hospital fast. Harborview roared under storm clouds, its bay crowded with gurneys, nurses triaging soaked arrivals, monitors singing need in overlapping tones. Rain raced down the ramp like a sheet of beads. Naomi waited under an awning, coat dark, eyes bright. They moved inside as the ambulance doors flew open. Victor looked waxen, pride stripped away by pain and noise. Clara stepped down with the notebook clutched like a warrant. Timeline, she told a triage nurse, handing it over. Please give it to the attending and neurology. Right away, the nurse said, already scanning entries. Aisha and Naomi followed the stretcher through swinging doors into fluorescent intensity. CT waited like a mouth of light. A resident called times. A tech set pads. A pharmacist ran with meds. He's aphasic, the attending muttered. Then louder. Airway secure. Sets reasonable. Pressure high. Focal signs preceded collapse. Aisha added. Drift. Misreach. Paroxysmal irritability. Pupil asymmetry without illumination shift. The attending looked up, measured her posture and nodded. Hold for imaging. Clara's fingers hovered near Victor's shoulder. The scanner swallowed him. Aisha stood with Naomi at the glass where rain made rivers. Monitors ticked like steady clocks. Minutes stretched and snapped. Images bloomed on a screen. Arterial trees shining pale as frost. Naomi leaned in. There, she said quietly. Posterior communicating artery aneurysm, with evidence of slow bleed. Sentinel trace along the cisterns. She pointed without touching. He's been leaking, not gushing. Tonight tipped it. The attending confirmed and paged neurosurgery. Orders flowed. Pressure control. Reversal if needed. Consent. Labs. Clip versus coil decision pending angio. Clara exhaled as if releasing weeks. She touched Aisha's arm. Gratitude unguarded. You kept him here, she said. Aisha shook her head. We all did, she answered, though she knew persistence pulled them to this bay. Naomi turned to her, warmth bright under severity. Your notes shortened the road, she said. You saw what pride hid, and gave medicine min. Through a window the Space Needle pierced mist. Traffic smeared into ribbons. A helicopter thumped overhead like a distant drum. Victor rolled toward the OR, pupils closer to equal under medication. Voice a frightened whisper that barely knew itself. Clara walked beside the rail, speaking promise into the noise. Marcus arrived damp and pale. Elena trailed, phone dark. They halted when they saw Aisha and lowered their eyes the way people do when certainty deserts them. We were wrong, Elena said. You did what leaders fail to do. Aisha gave a single nod. Focus on care, she said. Apologies can wait. Naomi squeezed her shoulder. Come to the family consult after consent, she said. You belong in the circle. Aisha looked at rain sliding down glass like string lights pulled into motion, and felt small and enormous at once. She was a woman in grey, who refused to let a life ride a lie, the mind that called time, shaped chaos, and steadied a fall. The OR doors closed, storm sound pressed against concrete, silence pulled. Clara returned from signing forms, and wrapped Aisha in a swift, shaking hug. "You saved my husband," she said. "They will cut, clip and pray, but you pulled us to this point." Aisha held her, then stepped back, eyes clear. In the waiting area, strangers watched screens, nurses moved coffee like medicine, and a maintenance worker erased wet footprints from the floor. Aisha watched beaded water race down the window and thought of Atlanta nights, a license taken by politics, silence weaponized, and how this night repaid a debt institutions owed to voices they push aside. She felt tired and steady and ready for the next hard room. Ever seen someone rise above prejudice to save a life? Stay with Aisha's story to see justice unfold. The storm thinned to drizzle by morning, leaving Harborview's windows veined with water and the hills beyond the freeway a lacquered green. Victor Langston woke under dimmed lights, a soft beep keeping time at his wrist, a dressing cooling his temple, humility replacing the stagecraft that had failed him. Naomi Foster stood with the attending and explained that a slow bleed had been coiled before it could become a catastrophe, that rest, pressure control, and follow-up imaging would guard the repair, that recovery would depend on learning to listen. Clara Langston held his hand, the steadiness of an old nurse returning, as the adrenaline drained. Aisha Carter stepped closer only when Victor looked up. His voice arrived quieter than she had ever heard it. "I was cruel," he said. "I confused rank with wisdom. I treated you like furniture. You saved my life, and I don't know how to repay what I broke before I fell." Aisha kept her tone even. "I saved you because it's my oath, not because you deserved it." He nodded, tears rising through medication, and promised to prove policy change, not posture. Aisha placed her notebook on the tray. "This belongs in the chart," she told the attending. "It documents what pride tried to hide." The doctor thanked her with the plain deference reserved for work that shortens the distance between harm and help. Outside, Seattle moved through mist that made cranes look like grey ribs and ferries like chalk marks across slate water. Inside, a clip from the auditorium had already slipped into feeds, then raced beyond them. The city watched a janitor cross a stage before security, call time, take direct steps, and keep a man alive while executives fumbled with microphones. Radio hosts debated culture, columnists wrote about status and blindness, neighbors shared the clip under cafe awnings, while rain drummed canvas. Aisha avoided cameras. She went to work on time, thanked the Harborview team, and sent facilities a memo about emergency drills on upper floors. Clara delivered a brief statement at noon. "My husband lived because a trained professional refused to let status speak louder than symptoms," she said. "Believe people who notice what you miss." Horizon replied with polished gratitude and promises of review. Still, employees began forwarding old emails to reporters. Memos signed by Elena Torres that recast dizziness as an adjustment period. Spreadsheets from Marcus Reed that treated adverse events like shrinkable optics. A staff forum leaked, revealing how concerns died in calendars, and how tone became the tool for disciplining dissent. By evening, umbrellas gathered in the plaza, signs inked with patient words that refused to blur in rain. Aisha watched from a bus stop, tired in a way sleep would not immediately fix, while Naomi arrived with paper cups and a silence that steadied. "You're being made into a headline," Naomi said. "Hold your center." A board session stretched late into the wet dark. Victor dialed in from his bed, voice stripped of theatrics. It urged directors to hire an independent firm to audit safety and culture, to build a whistleblower channel insulated from budget owners, and to fund scholarships for workers seeking clinical credential. Investors demanded dates, not adjectives. A sponsor paused a partnership until corrective action moved from slides to payroll. Marcus and Elena faced cameras, contrite in language if not yet in habit. Elena's letter admitted that speed had become a god, that dissent had been framed as impoliteness. Marcus promised resources, metrics, and protection for staff who halted a meeting on medical grounds. Aisha replied with a short list that made slogans unnecessary: Train every floor warden to recognize neurological red flags. Rehearse de-escalation instead of optics. Publish outcomes of anonymous reports. Protect hours for anyone who flags risk. Raise wages for the workers who see everything first. Clara sent the list to the board without edits. Seattle's Evergreen Ridge wore rain like silk, while newspapers printed a photo of Aisha outside the hospital, chin lifted, eyes steady, no halo added. In her studio, the window fogged as she ironed grey scrubs that had become an emblem despite her wishing. Messages poured in from ER nurses, janitors and students. Gratitude, questions, invitations. Aisha answered a few, declined most, and baked a pan of cornbread for the night shift. Victor asked for another meeting once his headaches eased and his speech regained cadence. He apologized again without theater, described an institute he wanted to fund for overlooked staff who wanted clinical training, and offered legal help to unwind the stain Atlanta had left on Aisha's record. She listened, then placed boundaries like I will seek reinstatement because patients need hands, she said. I won't take charity disguised as penance. Build pathways for workers who won't ever be invited into boardrooms. Fund them quietly. Start with the people whose names never appear on deck. He agreed, and for once agreement felt like a plan, not a headline. A committee formed with nurses, cleaners, and line workers at the table, chaired by Naomi, who asked for data first. Apologies later. Training modules rolled out that week. Badges gained a button to summon a medical halt without retaliation. A stipend covered community college prerequisites for custodial staff, starting nursing tracks. Reporters tried to turn Aisha into a circuit speaker. She declined most requests and returned to the cafe where she had first met Naomi. The barista slid over a mug with a smile that carried respect, not pity. A screen near the register showed Horizon's new commitments: scholarships, protected time, preceptor pay, translation services for families, and an annual audit published without spin. Aisha read each line and texted Clara a single word: progress. Rain lifted to a fine mist that made the skyline glow. The Space Needle pricked the low ceiling like a compass. Ferries pulsed across the water, and gulls wrote white cursive over pier. Back at the hospital, night shift nurses passed her cornbread around a break room and told her which drills worked and which still felt theatrical. She took notes and promised to carry those specifics into the next committee session. Victor began physical therapy with a humility that surprised even him. On good days he practiced listening until it ached. On hard days he said very little and let silence do corrective work. He sent a letter to staff acknowledging that he had allowed deference to masquerade as truth, and that he had measured worth by proximity to his door. He named Aisha, Naomi, and Clara as the teachers who had added years to his life. Aisha read the letter, then set it aside and laced her shoes for work. Recognition mattered less than readiness. She walked through Horizon's lobby past a security guard who nodded with unforced warmth, rode an elevator, where a new poster described warning signs in plain language, and stepped into a boardroom, whose glossy table now held a small kit, labeled emergency base. Rain streaked the windows again, turning the city into a watercolor. Aisha wiped a ring from the wood, checked the time, and felt something that wasn't triumph and wasn't anger. It was steadiness. Seattle breathed, evergreen and wet and stubbornly beautiful, and within that breath a woman who had been told to scrub and be silent stood exactly where she chose, prepared for the next hard room, and unshaken by the ones behind her. The award arrived on a bright morning that smelled of wet cedar and espresso. The kind of Seattle day when mist breaks and sun slips across the sound like a coin skimming water for luck. Ashisha Carter stood at a podium inside the Pacific Heritage Museum. At the same time, cameras blinked and schoolchildren pressed their hands to glass, reading placards that paired bravery with ordinary work done under extraordinary pressure. Behind her, in a lit case, hung the grey scrub top she wore the night she steadied a stage, called time, and refused to let hierarchy bury symptoms. A placard beneath it named the garment a symbol of vigilance, dignity, and community care. She accepted a national medal from a surgeon who had trained at Harborview, and when applause surged, she bowed and said that medicine belongs to everyone, not those who hold titles. Outside, ferries traced white seams across Puget Sound, gulls carved bright loops over piers, and hills behind the city burned emerald after rain. Victor Langston watched from a back row, thinner, quieter, holding Clara's hand. He had announced his step back from Horizon the previous week, telling shareholders that leadership sometimes means giving room for wiser voices. He left with a promise, then kept it: a medical training program funded in Aisha's name, built on scholarships for janitors, security guards, cafeteria workers, and receptionists who kept clinics alive. The institute opened in a trio of low buildings on the waterfront, glass reflecting tide and sky, classrooms warmed by cedar paneling, skills labs stocked with mannequins and monitors that chirped like small birds, windows framed cranes and freighters, reminding every student that care lives where people labor, not only under chandeliers. Each new cohort carried stories of nights on mop handles, days behind desks, double shifts on loading docks, and now a chance to learn triage, anatomy, pharmacology, ethics, and the language of consent. Ashisha taught mornings on recognition of neurological red flags, writing timestamps on whiteboards, and showing how calm turns chaos into choreography. Afternoons, she walked through community clinics from Rainier Beach to White Center, leading vaccination drives, blood pressure screenings, stroke awareness talks at churches, and late-night food pantry pop-ups where a nurse's eye could change a stubborn tide. The city began to feel different, not safer in myth, but more honest. Posters in elevators, naming symptoms without jargon, front desk scripts that invited questions. These break room drills respected the wisdom of the person who sees the whole floor. The institute's scholarship wall wore a simple sentence, lettered by a custodian who had taught himself calligraphy: listen hard, then act. Victor visited often without cameras, hauling boxes, sweeping between classes, and sitting in the back with a notebook. He apologized 100 quiet ways, funding childcare stipends, underwriting stipends for clinical preceptors, paying translators who helped families navigate forms, and pushing Horizon's board to publish outcomes rather than slogans. Elena Torres and Marcus Reed returned too, not with speeches, but with open calendars. They had weathered a public reckoning and chosen the slower repair of habits. Safety halts honored without retaliation, dissent logged and addressed, bonuses tied to patient outcomes and staff retention instead of launch dates. Every month, Naomi Foster chaired a round table where students, custodians, nurses and executives sat at the same table, coffee rings marking paper next to data printouts. They measured how many workers advanced into clinical roles, how many families received in-language counseling, and how many emergencies were caught early because someone felt permitted to speak. The numbers grew in quiet arc. In March, a bus driver felt a sudden thunderclap headache, and a receptionist trained at the institute called 911. Before denial could write a story, a coil saved him by nightfall. The media kept calling Aisha a hero, and she kept redirecting praise toward the choir that had formed around her. She told reporters that Atlanta never broke her oath, only tried to bury it, and that Seattle helped her dig it back out with both hands. On summer evenings, she sat on a bench above the water with Naomi, sipping tea while ferries pulsed down the channel and mountains sharpened against orange skies. They talked about students, who reminded them of younger selves, about the discipline of telling the truth, even when rooms weren't ready, about rest as a duty. Sometimes Clara joined them, shoes kicked off, laughter easy, the three women watching the city's lights arrive like stars that decided to live close to Earth. When Aisha finally received notice that her license was reinstated, the letter came with no apology, just a legal correction and a stamped date. She framed it anyway, not for the bureaucracy, but for the arc that led from a locked office in Atlanta to a waterfront classroom where former custodians taught pulse checks to brand new interns. The museum added a second case that fall, a badge from Horizon, with a new feature, a small red button, that any employee could press to stop a meeting and request a clinical evaluation without penalty. The label read, Systems Learn. In schools, children began writing essays about the woman who kept watch, who spoke when it would have been easier to vanish, who showed that status cannot muzzle skill. Aisha responded to some letters by hand, folding paper with care, reminding kids to notice neighbors, to ask for help, to measure worth by use, not title. The institute's first graduating class walked across a pier lit by string lights, families cheering beneath umbrellas. A barista who once refilled Aisha's cup now wore a white coat pinned with a tiny mop charm. A security guard recited a short vow in Spanish, voice shaking, daughter on his hip. Victor handed out diplomas and then stepped aside while graduates filled the stage, a reversal he had learned slowly, painfully, honestly. Aisha spoke last. She told them that medicine is not a tower but a field, and that fields need many hands, especially those accustomed to working unseen. She thanked mentors by name, saluted janitors who had coached executives through their first real drills, and asked the class to carry forward a practice, both simple and radical: make room for the person with the clearest view, even when that view arrives from the doorway with a mop. Afterward she walked home along the waterfront, wind bright with salt, ferry horns steady as heartbeats. She thought of an ambulance ride, a notebook crammed with timestamps, a hospital bay where slow bleeding met fast hands, a museum case holding cloth that smelled faintly of bleach and courage. She thought of co-workers who once looked through her and now waved her over to plan another clinic, of students who sent texts at midnight from shifts where they caught early warning signs and changed outcome. She thought of Atlanta's heat, of names erased from schedules, of a committee that chose politics over truth, and she felt both grief and gratitude braided tight, no longer fighting each other. When she reached her building, she paused beneath the awning and let fine rain freckle her cheek. Cars murmured along Alaskan Way. Somewhere a saxophone practiced the same phrase until it finally rang clean. Upstairs, she placed the medal in a drawer and left the case empty on her shelf, a reminder that awards are milestones, not destination. Morning would bring more work: a free clinic at a church, a training session on stroke scales, a meeting about mental health support for night crews, a call with a senator who wanted to replicate the Institute model along the coast. She felt ready because the community had become muscle. After all, the city itself seemed to carry part of the load. The next week, Horizon announced a permanent fund for employee education, named after the three women who bent its arc: Aisha, Naomi, and Clara. No stagecraft, a check, a charter, and a promise to measure success by lives steadied, jobs advanced, and harms prevented. Aisha walked the pier with Victor that afternoon. He thanked her again without asking for absolution. She answered that forgiveness is a verb, best conjugated as chain. He nodded, pulled his beanie low, and laughed at himself, strange and free. Her voice, when she spoke again, carried the modest certainty that had recalibrated a city's heartbeat. If Aisha's story moved you, subscribe to see more stories of unsung heroes, proving their worth against all odds. What happens next will inspire you.